What would you do if you saw an elderly man in a worn-out military jacket quietly being denied boarding at an airport? What would you do? If you found out he was a hero who had once traded his own future for the freedom of an entire generation. Welcome to a true story where a small decision uncovered a much greater truth, a seemingly ordinary moment that sparked a wave of change, not just for one man, but for an entire airline and beyond. Hold on tight to your seat, because what you're about to witness will change the way you view gratitude, courage, and the worth of every individual. Stay tuned until the very end. The twist will leave you breathless. Let's begin. The sound of uneven footsteps echoed across the crowded airport terminal, a wooden cane tapping softly against the polished tile like lonely drum beats. Walter Mitchell pulled his faded army jacket tighter around his thin frame, the worn metals on his chest catching the harsh neon light in a faint, proud shimmer. Beneath the frayed brim of his cap, his sky-blue eyes, etched with the deep lines of time, still held a quiet pride. For Walter, today's flight was nothing special, just a trip to Seattle to attend a memorial ceremony for his old military unit. A formality he never much cared for. But at his age, with few comrades still alive, he knew he had to be there. When he handed his boarding pass to the agent, a young woman named Chloe, she gave him a quick glance, her smile faltering before snapping back into place like a mask. "I'm sorry, Sir," Chloe said, her voice polite but frosty. "This ticket isn't valid for this flight." Walter frowned, still calm. "That can't be right. I bought it a month ago. Seat 22B. Chloe scanned the ticket again, then shook her head. "I'm sorry. That seat's already been assigned to another passenger. Please step aside while we sort this out." Walter nodded and quietly shuffled to a corner of the terminal, while the stream of other passengers flowed past him as if he were invisible. Not far away, leaning against a pillar in a black hoodie and worn jeans, a young man watched the scene unfold. No one noticed him, but that man was Brandon Reed, the CEO of SkyWest Wings Airlines. Brandon had a habit. Every quarter he traveled incognito, blending in among passengers to quietly observe how his staff treated customers. He firmly believed that a company's true worth showed in the smallest moments, the ones no report or marketing campaign could cover up. And today, he had just witnessed something that made his stomach churn. Brandon overheard Chloe whispering to a co-worker, "This flight's overbooked. That old guy's gonna cause trouble. Better not let him board, it'll be less of a headache." Brandon clenched his fists, forcing himself not to intervene immediately. He needed to watch just a little longer. Walter remained patiently at the side, gripping his cane like it was the only thing holding him upright. Minutes dragged on. 10, 15. Finally, Chloe returned, her forced smile barely covering her reluctance. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell," she said, "the flight's full. We can rebook you for tomorrow." Walter looked up at her, his voice trembling slightly but still steady. "I have somewhere I need to be. I paid for this ticket." Chloe shrugged her eyes, indifferent. "I understand, sir, but there's nothing more we can do. Thank you for your patience." At that moment, Brandon stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "Excuse me? What's going on here?" Chloe jumped, visibly flustered. "No problem, sir. This passenger is just having a minor issue with his ticket." Brandon stared straight at her, his gaze sharp. "He has a valid ticket. Your responsibility is to make sure he boards. No excuses." Walter looked at Brandon, surprise and gratitude flickering across his face. "I'm Walter. Thank you for speaking up, young man. But it's okay. I'm used to it." Brandon smiled warmly, but firmly. "No, Mr. Mitchell. You shouldn't have to get used to being treated this way." He stood beside Walter quietly but firmly, making it clear. Today, Walter Mitchell would not be left behind. Chloe hurried away, whispering nervously to a colleague behind the counter. Brandon stood beside Walter, outwardly calm, but with eyes sharp as a blade. In his mind, every word, every cold gesture from the staff was being recorded in vivid detail. Just a few minutes later, Chloe returned, her smile stiff and forced. "Mr. Mitchell, we've found an open seat. But I'm sorry, it's the last one near the restroom." Walter frowned slightly. Everyone knew those were the worst seats, noisy, cramped with no room to stretch out. But he simply exhaled softly and said, "That's fine as long as I can get on the flight." Brandon clenched his fists. He wanted to shout, "Is this how you treat a veteran?" But he held back. He needed to witness more to fully understand how deep the rot in the service culture ran. Walter quietly followed the stream of passengers toward the boarding bridge, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the metal floor. Brandon followed, too fully stepping into the role of a silent companion. Row 38G, a cramped corner next to the restroom, thick with the smell of chemicals and stale air. Walter struggled to lift his small duffel bag into the overhead bin, but failed. Brandon quickly stepped in, lifting the bag neatly into place. "Thank you, son," Walter said with a warm, gentle smile. Brandon took the empty seat beside him, pretending to scroll through his phone, but in truth, his attention never wavered. The plane began to taxi. Flight attendants, including Chloe, walked down the cabin conducting safety checks. Brandon noticed that when Chloe passed Walter, she barely spared him a glance. No smile, no greeting, just cold indifference. When the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, Brandon leaned toward Walter and asked casually, "Mr. Mitchell, are you visiting family in Seattle?" Walter shook his head, his voice low and calm. "No, I'm attending a memorial for my old battalion. This year, there are only a few of us left." The simple words felt heavy like lead. Brandon could feel it in every breath. Walter took a profound loneliness, a deep sense of pride, and a refusal to burden anyone else even for the smallest kindness. A little while later, Walter chuckled softly and pointed to the medals on his jacket. "Back then, we didn't fight for medals. We fought for the guy next to us." Brandon swallowed hard, an image of his own grandfather, a World War II veteran, flashing through his mind. The old man who used to tell stories about fallen brothers, about loyalty that needed no oath. While they talked, a little girl about 5 years old peered back at Walter from the row ahead. She tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, is that man a superhero?" The mother flushed red quickly, pulling her daughter away as if afraid Walter's very presence might make someone uncomfortable. Brandon watched the scene unfold, a sharp ache stabbing his chest. People saw the scars of war on Walter, but no one saw the battles he still fought every single day. When the meal service began, Chloe pushed the cart down the aisle. When she reached Walter, she barely asked anything, simply dropped a leftover meal tray on his table while other passengers were politely asked about their special meal preferences. Walter, ever gracious, simply said, "Thank you." Brandon couldn't take it anymore. He stood up and walked briskly to the back of the plane, quietly flagging down another flight attendant, Kelsey, a younger woman with a much kinder demeanor. "Kelsey, can I ask you something?" Brandon lowered his voice. "How are employees trained to handle elderly passengers, especially veterans?" Kelsey hesitated, then sighed. "Honestly, sir, we aren't given any special training. We just go by best guess most of the time." Brandon thanked her, feeling the weight settle heavier in his chest. No specialized training, no priority policies, nothing. He returned to his seat, a steely resolve hardening inside him. This had to change. Before sitting back down, Brandon leaned toward Walter and asked softly, "Would you mind if I treated you to a cup of coffee after we land? I'd love to hear more about your days back then." Walter gave him a warm, gentle smile, a glimmer lighting up his tired eyes. "I'd be honored, young man." Brandon nodded, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and fiery determination. This flight this day wasn't just going to change Walter's life. It was going to change SkyWest Wings forever. The plane landed at Seattle Airport under a faded sunset, the light streaming through the cabin windows and casting a golden hue over the rows of seats. Brandon waited patiently until the other passengers had disembarked, then stepped forward to help Walter to his feet, gently lifting the small duffel bag at his feet. The two men made their way slowly through the bustling terminal. Despite the crowd and noise, Brandon felt as if the world had slowed down around them, leaving only the sound of Walter's cane tapping against the cold stone floor and the soft scuff of their shoes. They found a small cafe tucked away behind a row of boarding gates. Brandon chose a quiet corner table, one that looked out toward the distant runways. He placed a cup of black coffee, no sugar, just as Walter had requested in front of the old man. Walter took a sip, his gaze distant. "Thank you, Brandon. Not many people would bother to sit and listen to some old man's stories." Brandon smiled. "I believe those stories deserve to be heard more than anything else." A brief silence passed between them. Then, as if a door to the past had creaked open, Walter began to speak. 1952. He said, his voice low, his thin hands gripping the paper cup tightly. "At White Ridge Outpost, we were surrounded for 3 days straight. Bone-chilling cold. Ammo running out. Wounded men screaming in the thick fog." Brandon sat silently, giving his full attention to every word. "On the last day, it was just me and Lieutenant Patrick Matthews. He was badly wounded. You know," Walter's voice caught slightly. "He ordered me to leave him behind to save myself. But I didn't. I carried him on my back for nearly 4 kilometers through enemy lines with bullets whizzing past us." Walter paused, looking upward as if reliving the memory. Matthews didn't make it, but at least he didn't die alone. Brandon clenched his fists under the table, his heart aching. "Sir Mitchell," he said hoarsely, "what you did, that wasn't just heroism. That was pure character." Walter shook his head. "It wasn't heroism. It was what any soldier should have done. The saddest thing is war teaches lessons that peace tends to forget. Never leave anyone behind." Another long silence settled between them. Brandon looked at the man before him, small in stature, yet carrying a soul made of steel. He took a deep breath. "Mr. Mitchell, I never properly introduced myself. I'm Brandon Cooper, CEO of SkyWest Wings." Walter paused, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. Brandon nodded, his voice sincere. "I go undercover to observe firsthand how our staff treat passengers. But today, I witnessed something that broke my heart." Walter leaned back in his chair, chuckling softly. "Ah, now I see why you cared about an old fossil like me. It's not about responsibility," Brandon said quietly. "It's about gratitude." Walter studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Thank you, young man. That's all I needed to hear." Brandon smiled faintly, but in his mind, a far bigger plan was already forming. Not just an apology. Not just a small fix. He would change the way SkyWest Wings treated those who had sacrificed for this country. He would create a program not for publicity, but to truly restore the honor owed to men like Walter. He pulled out his phone and quickly typed a message to his top aide. "Schedule an emergency meeting with the Customer Service Division. 48 hours. Topic: launching the Honor Wings project." As Brandon hit send and looked up, he saw Walter watching him curiously. "I just planned something special," Brandon said, his eyes brightening. "Not just for you, but for every person who ever wore the uniform." Walter chuckled, a warm but slightly bashful smile spreading across his face. "You don't need to do anything for me." "I know," Brandon said, voice dropping to a soft, solemn tone. "But America owes you." "We all do." In that moment, in a tiny airport cafe, lost amid the chaos of the world, a silent promise was made. A vow that sacrifice would not be forgotten. Brandon stood up and extended his hand. "Let me take you to your hotel, sir." "Come on, my hero." Walter smiled, rose with the help of his cane, and grasped Brandon's hand. A handshake that seemed to bridge the gap between past and present. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight a warm cup of coffee and an honest promise were enough to begin a revolution from the heart. The next morning, sunlight in Seattle pierced through the gray clouds, lighting up the hotel hallway where Walter was staying. Brandon had arranged for him a warm, fully equipped room, a stark contrast to the cramped airplane seat and the cold airport terminals of the day before. Right at 8 a.m. Brandon was already waiting in the lobby holding 2 cups of hot coffee, one for himself, one for Walter. Walter emerged from the elevator leaning on his cane. The faded army jacket from the previous day had been replaced with a simple gray coat, but the cap embroidered with the word veteran still sat proudly on his head. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell." Brandon greeted warmly, extending a cup of coffee. Walter smiled, his eyes sparkling with appreciation. "You remembered I like it black." They walked together out of the hotel and climbed into the black SUV waiting at the curb. Brandon took the wheel, steering towards SkyWest Wing's headquarters, where a historic meeting was about to unfold. Inside the car, the atmosphere was initially quiet. Walter sat silently, his aged eyes gazing out the window, taking in every street lamp and storefront with a reverence only someone who had nearly lost everything could feel. Brandon broke the silence, his voice deep and steady. "Mr. Mitchell, I've thought a lot about what you shared yesterday, and I don't want it to end with empty promises." Walter turned to look at Brandon, raising an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Brandon gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, a determined light in his eyes. "I've made a plan. Today, I'm presenting to the entire executive board the creation of the Honor Wings program, a special initiative to honor our veterans." Walter blinked in surprise. Brandon continued, his voice unwavering. "We're not just going to prioritize service. We're going to give veterans what they truly deserve. Respect, dignity, and the best care we can offer." Walter was silent, his aged hand tightening around his cane. It had been a long time since he'd heard a young person speak of duty and honor with such passion. The SUV pulled up in front of the towering glass building bearing the SkyWest Wings logo. Brandon stepped out first, then walked around to open Walter's door, a simple gesture, but one overflowing with respect. Employees passing by glanced curiously at the elderly man moving slowly, but with eyes that still shone brightly. Little did they know that within a few hours, this quiet veteran would inspire a change across the entire company. The top-floor conference room buzzed with chatter. Department heads, customer service managers, and PR representatives were all present. Brandon entered with Walter following close behind. The room immediately fell silent. Brandon spoke clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a special guest. This is Mr. Walter Mitchell, a Korean War veteran who devoted his youth to the peace we enjoy today." Walter nodded respectfully. No forced applause, only a heavy, respectful silence. Brandon clicked to the first slide of his presentation. A photo appeared. Walter standing alone at the boarding gate the day before, cane in hand. His eyes filled with quiet patience. Several employees immediately recognized the scene. Their faces shifted some paling. Brandon didn't shy away. He recounted the entire incident, how their staff had carelessly, disrespectfully denied Walter his seat. No sugarcoating, no excuses. "I witnessed it firsthand," Brandon concluded, sweeping his gaze across the room. "And I am ashamed for us. No one dared to breathe loudly." He clicked to the next slide. "But today, we will set things right. Not with words, but with actions." He then presented the Honor Wings program. Complimentary upgrades for all veterans. Priority boarding and special service lanes. Lifetime flight passes for decorated veterans. Annual ceremonies honor veterans and connect them with the broader passenger community. Dedicated veteran lounges at major airports. The room buzzed again, not with objections, but with astonishment, admiration, and shame. Brandon paused, locking eyes with the board. We can spend millions on marketing campaigns, but today, by simply doing the right thing, we earn something no amount of advertising can buy. Trust. Walter sat quietly, watching it all unfold, a small spark of hope kindling in his chest. The silence hung heavy, until a hand shot up Amanda Blake, the regional customer service director. "I support it," she said loudly. "Let's make it happen." One by one, others voiced their agreement. The Honor Wings program was approved. Walter remained still, his nose stinging with emotion. Brandon turned and placed a firm hand on the old man's shoulder. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you. I promise this is just the beginning." Walter grasped Brandon's hand tightly. For the first time in many years, he felt that the sacrifices of his past had not been forgotten. A new day, a new chapter had begun. That afternoon, after the groundbreaking meeting at SkyWest Wings headquarters, Brandon suggested taking Walter on a tour of the new office space designated for the Honor Wings program. As they walked, the conversation grew more relaxed. Walter shared more small anecdotes from his soldiering days, the whiteout blizzards, the moonless nights of marching, and the comrades who never made it home from foreign soil. Brandon listened in silence, every story striking a tender chord deep inside him. He understood more profoundly than ever why honoring veterans wasn't just necessary, it was urgent. The elevator stopped at the 18th floor, the doors opening onto a space still under construction. A temporary Honor Wings Center sign hung above the entrance, and the smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air. Walter squinted, smiling. "Looks like you folks move faster than I expected." Brandon nodded, his eyes bright. "We didn't want to just create a program. We wanted to build a true home for people like you." They walked deeper into the main area, which was being designed as a dedicated lounge for veterans. Plush leather seating walls adorned with photos of military units across generations, and a small section showcasing rare wartime memorabilia. Walter paused before a large painting being mounted on the wall. A young soldier standing amid a rain of bullets, the American flag billowing from his hands. The determination and sacrifice captured in the soldier's eyes needed no words. Walter knew instantly. This painting was telling the story of an entire generation. As they stepped back into the elevator, an unexpected scene awaited them downstairs. In the lobby, dozens of SkyWest Wings employees had gathered. They had organized a small, spontaneous ceremony, hand-painted signs reading, "Thank you for your service, white chrysanthemums," and a roaring round of applause as Walter stepped out. Walter froze, his vision suddenly blurring with tears. Brandon leaned over and whispered, "No one ordered them to do this, sir. They chose to." A young flight attendant stepped forward, offering Walter a small bouquet of flowers. "We're proud to serve you, Mr. Mitchell." Walter bowed his head slightly as he accepted it, his hands trembling as if clutching not just flowers, but long-buried memories flooding back. Brandon motioned for quiet, then stepped onto a small podium and spoke loudly. "Today we don't just honor one man. We honor an entire generation." He turned to Walter. "Mr. Mitchell, from this day forward, the honor of SkyWest Wings will be tied to your name. You will be the first honorary ambassador of the Honor Wings program." Applause thundered across the lobby. Walter stood there, no longer able to hide his tears. Brandon stepped down and handed him a gleaming metal card. "A lifetime VIP member, Honor Wings Ambassador." Walter gripped it tightly as if holding a piece of his very soul. That evening, Brandon drove Walter back to the hotel. As they were about to part ways, Walter spoke slowly. "Brandon, there's something I need to say." Brandon nodded, sensing the weight in Walter's voice. Walter sighed. I'm grateful for what you and your people did today. But I can't accept all this honor. If it's only for me. Brandon hesitated, then asked gently, "What do you mean?" Walter locked eyes with him, his gaze deep and unwavering. "I'm the lucky one who survived. But there are so many of my comrades. Men who rest in nameless fields, lost to forgotten battles. If you want to truly honor us, don't do it for me alone. Do it for all of them." Brandon was speechless. Slowly, Walter reached into his coat and pulled out a tarnished silver badge, an old divisional insignia. He placed it into Brandon's hand. "Don't let them be forgotten." Brandon closed his hand around the small, worn emblem, his voice breaking. "I promise." That night, Brandon stayed up at his desk wide awake. Before him lay a new plan: to expand Honor Wings beyond a Veterans Assistance Program into the Memorial Flight Initiative, a campaign of commemorative flights, each one named after a military unit, a historic battle, or a group of heroes. And that tarnished silver badge. Brandon decided it would be displayed at the very heart of the Honor Wings Center. Not just to honor, but to remind every future generation. Heroes are never forgotten. 3 weeks after that unforgettable night, the Memorial Flight Initiative officially launched. Brandon didn't just keep his promise to Walter Mitchell. He turned the idea into a national-scale event capturing attention across the country. The first Boeing 787 of the campaign, named the Fallen Heroes, was unveiled with a special logo, a silver-black ribbon wrapped around a pair of angel wings, symbolizing the souls who had departed. On the day of the dedication ceremony, Walter was invited as the guest of honor. When he stepped out of the car at SkyWest's private terminal, hundreds of people lined both sides of the walkway, waving small American flags to welcome him. Brandon, dressed in a deep navy suit, waited at the entrance of the stage. As soon as he saw Walter making his way forward, cane in hand, he immediately stepped up and gave him a soldier's salute. Walter smiled, his weathered hand patting Brandon's shoulder. "You've done more than I ever dared hope for." "No, mister." Mitchell Brandon replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You inspired all of us to make this happen." The ceremony began. Brandon stepped up to the podium, the gleaming aircraft towering behind him under the midday sun. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today isn't just about a flight. This is the first journey to honor the heroes that history sometimes forgets." Thunderous applause filled the air. Brandon turned toward Walter. "And to launch this journey, it is my honor to introduce the first honorary ambassador of the Memorial Flight Initiative, Mr. Walter Mitchell." Walter awkwardly made his way to the stage. He had never been comfortable in the spotlight, but when he stood before the microphone, his eyes burned bright with pride. In a raspy but firm voice, Walter spoke about his fallen comrades, about sacrifices that never made headlines, but shaped the world we live in. "When we fought," Walter said in closing, "we didn't think of glory. We thought only of doing right by the man next to us." The crowd fell silent, many discreetly wiping away tears. Brandon approached Walter and presented him with a special token, a commemorative medal engraved with the words, "For those who never returned. We remember." Walter accepted it, holding it tightly against his chest, his eyes shining as if for a brief moment he could see his old brothers in arms smiling back at him from afar. After the ceremony, Brandon took Walter aboard the aircraft for a tour. The first-class cabin had been specially redesigned. Each seat bore a small nameplate engraved with the name and unit of a fallen soldier. Walter froze when he saw the first one, Private First Class, Thomas Green, 25th Infantry Division. "I knew him," Walter whispered. "Fought with him at Jeonju. He was a good soldier." Deeper inside the aircraft, they reached a remembrance section displaying wartime relics. Crumpled letters, dented helmets, faded family photographs, all donated by veterans' families to honor their lost loved ones. Brandon paused before a large plaque, its inscription reading, Every life remembered, every story honored, every sacrifice is eternal. Walter couldn't hold back the tears. Silently, he unpinned the worn silver badge from his chest, the keepsake he had carried for decades, and solemnly placed it on the memorial table. Brandon stood motionless, understanding that no ceremony could ever match the sacredness of that moment. As the Boeing 787 lifted into the sky for its first commemorative flight, Walter and Brandon sat side by side, gazing out the window. Under the fiery red sunset, the aircraft, named after fallen heroes, soared into the endless sky, carrying with it their immortal vows. Walter whispered almost to himself. At last, we're home. Brandon turned, gripping Walter's hand tightly, a silent promise exchanged between two generations. That flight didn't just carry passengers to a destination. It carried an entire generation of heroes. Back into the heart of the country they once fought to protect. The first memorial flight left an impact far greater than anyone could have imagined. Within just the first week, hundreds of messages, emails, and calls flooded SkyWest Airlines' customer service center, but this time, they weren't complaints. They were emotional messages of gratitude. A widow wrote, "My son died in Fallujah. When I read about the memorial flight today, I cried. Thank you for reminding the world that those names are not just cold engravings on stone." An elderly veteran in Arizona sent in a note. "No one has remembered me since I came home. You've given us a gift greater than any medal you've given us understanding." Brandon sat in his office reading every message, every handwritten letter printed out by his staff. Outside the window, he could see the Boeing 787, the fallen heroes, being prepped for its next journey, the sunset casting a golden glow across its gleaming fuselage like a halo in the fading light. It wasn't just the passengers who noticed. The media quickly picked up the story. CNN, Fox News, and CBS all ran features on the Memorial Flight Initiative. Major newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post praised SkyWest as a beacon of humanity in a cold industry. SkyWest's stock surged. But Brandon didn't care about the numbers. In his heart, there was only one thing that mattered: the belief that they had done the right thing. 1 week after the inaugural flight, Brandon convened a special meeting with all senior leadership. He stood before a packed conference room behind him, a large banner that read, "Honor isn't a policy, it's a commitment." Brandon didn't open the meeting with charts or market trends. He began with a story, not about profits or market share, but about Walter Mitchell. He recounted how an aging veteran had been coldly turned away at a boarding gate because of the indifference of those wearing the SkyWest uniform. The room fell silent. Brandon locked eyes with every person in the room. "We were wrong," he said, his voice steady and low. "We forgot that behind every boarding pass, every economy or business class seat, there's a human being, a story, a sacrifice." He paced slowly, his eyes never leaving the room. "But we were given a second chance. Memorial Flight is only the beginning. I don't want it to be a one-time campaign or some PR move. I want it to become the DNA of SkyWest." He paused, voice firm. "We will establish a lifetime priority system for veterans. We will host honors ceremonies at every international terminal. And we will retrain every employee not just to say thank you for your service, but to truly listen to and honor the stories behind those weathered uniforms." A hand went up. It was Nicole Harper, East Coast Regional Director. "Sir Taylor?" she said, her voice slightly trembling. "Could we go one step further, I think? We should sponsor free flights for the families of fallen soldiers so they can attend memorial events." Brandon smiled. "That's a brilliant idea, Nicole. We'll make it happen." More suggestions followed, ideas blossoming like wildfire. Specialized training programs, scholarship funds for veterans' children, fundraisers to support PTSD organizations. Brandon was no longer fighting alone. The entire SkyWest family, from the marketing heads to the baggage handlers, from chief flight attendants to technical directors, stepped up. Together, they would transform the Memorial Flight Initiative into a living, breathing commitment. Not just to honor one man like Walter Mitchell, but to honor the thousands, the millions, the Harolds, the Walters, the Thomases, who had been forgotten in the relentless rush of modern life. After the meeting ended, Brandon sat alone. He pulled out a small card from his pocket. The front showed an image of the Memorial Flight Boeing soaring through the clouds. The back carried a simple handwritten message in blue ink. Thank you for seeing what others chose to overlook. Walter Mitchell. Brandon closed his hand around the card, his eyes shutting briefly. He knew the road ahead would be long, filled with challenges. But in that moment, in that quiet room, he knew he was on the right path. Not just as a CEO, but as a man who dared to face the truth and create change. A flight might end, but a promise to the souls who fought for freedom, would soar forever across the skies. Memorial Day arrived, and SkyWest Airlines hosted a special ceremony at Denver International Airport, the very place that had once witnessed the quiet journey of Walter Mitchell. Today, Gate D23 was decorated with solemn elegance. Red, white, and blue ribbons fluttered gently in the breeze. A brand new Boeing 787 named the Spirit of Valor stood proudly by the runway, its fuselage emblazoned with the words, "In honor of those who served." Hundreds gathered: veterans, military families, SkyWest employees, passengers, and members of the press. Everyone fell silent as Brandon Taylor stepped up to the podium. He wore a deep navy suit, simple but dignified. No medals, no lavish displays, just a small American flag pin over his heart. Brandon took a deep breath and looked toward the front row where Walter Mitchell sat. His hair now a crown of white, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still shining with strength. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brandon began, his voice steady and resonant, "today we are not just here to christen a new aircraft." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "Today, we fulfill a promise that no one will be forgotten. That we will always remember the price paid by people like Walter Mitchell and millions of others, not just during wartime, but every single day afterward." Applause broke out, not loud and frenzied, but deep and heartfelt. Brandon continued, "Starting today, every veteran flying with SkyWest will be prioritized and honored. And more than that, we have established the Valor Foundation, a fund dedicated to supporting veterans and their families, helping them reintegrate, heal, and rebuild their futures." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "But our greatest achievement today isn't a plane or a charity. Our greatest achievement is the change within the hearts of each and every one of us." After the speech, Brandon personally escorted Walter to the stage. A SkyWest employee presented Walter with a special gift, a lifetime honor pass granting him and his family unlimited free travel. Walter stood there speechless, his hands trembling slightly as he accepted the pass. He looked up at Brandon, eyes glistening with tears. "My son once dreamed that someday people would truly understand what we went through." Walter said, his voice rough with emotion. "Today, I think he might just be smiling down from heaven." Brandon bowed his head, overcome with feeling. In that moment, all barriers of age, of generation, of titles melted away. There were only human beings standing together on the side of what was right. The national anthem played. The ceremonial ribbon before the aircraft's nose was cut. The Spirit of Valor began to taxi down the runway, ready for its first journey, Memorial Flight 001, dedicated entirely to veterans and their families. Walter was invited aboard this inaugural flight. As he climbed the steps to the plane, the crowd rose to their feet, a thunderous standing ovation following him. Hundreds of eyes watched, not with indifference or pity, but with genuine respect and gratitude. That afternoon, the sky was a brilliant, almost surreal blue. The plane bearing Walter Mitchell's name soared upward, carving a proud arc across the heavens, a living, breathing tribute to courage and sacrifice. Brandon stood at the terminal window, following the plane until it was nothing more than a speck in the vast sky. Beside him stood Samantha, once the employee who had made a critical mistake, now the newly appointed head of customer service. She clutched her clipboard tightly. "Do you think we've done enough?" Samantha asked quietly. Brandon smiled softly, his gaze never leaving the sky. "We're just getting started," he whispered. He knew there were still so many more Harolds, Walters, and Thomases out there. So many stories still waiting to be heard, still waiting to be honored. And he vowed right then and there that SkyWest Airlines would become a place where every human being, young or old, decorated or scarred, would be treated like the hero they are. A place where legacy wasn't just painted on the tail of a plane, it was etched into the hearts of everyone who walked through its doors. As the spirit of valor soared skyward, it carried more than just passengers. It carried gratitude, respect, and a solemn reminder that every life matters, every story deserves to be heard. Walter Mitchell had lived like a true hero, quietly, steadfastly asking for nothing more than basic human dignity. And today, because a few people refuse to accept indifference, his story has reached millions. If you believe that small actions can lead to great change, share this story. Let courage not just be remembered, but carried forward. Help ensure that heroes like Walter are never forgotten. Hit share, like, subscribe to spread the values that truly matter. We'll see you in the next story that inspires the world.